The airport never slept. Even late in the afternoon, the terminal buzzed with the constant movement of humanity. Suitcases rolled across polished floors, announcements echoed from ceiling speakers, and travelers hurried past each other without a second thought. In a place like this, thousands of lives crossed paths every hour. And most of those moments meant absolutely nothing. But sometimes, a single moment could change everything. Amara Brooks stood near gate C-17 with her small carry-on bag resting against her leg. She wore navy scrubs under a soft gray cardigan, the sleeves slightly rolled at the wrists. In her hands was a thick orientation folder with bold blue letters across the front. Crestwood Medical Center, New Clinical Staff Orientation. Her name was written neatly on the tab. Amara Brooks, RN. It had taken years to reach this moment. 3 exhausting years of nursing school. 2 years of hospital rotations. Countless nights studying while her classmates slept. And 1 brutal licensing exam that she had failed the first time before finally passing on the second. Now she was finally starting her career. Her first real job. Her first real hospital. Her first real step into the life she had dreamed about since she was a teenager. But standing there in the middle of the busy terminal, Amara didn't feel triumphant. She felt nervous. Her stomach twisted slightly as she glanced again at the boarding screen. Flight 482, Crestwood, boarding in 35 minutes. She exhaled slowly. "You're ready," she whispered quietly to herself. She had said those words at least 20 times that day. Sometimes believing them. Sometimes not. Across the terminal, someone stood out from the crowd. Not because he was loud. Not because he demanded attention. But because he didn't. The man stood near the drinking fountain, completely still while chaos flowed around him like water around a stone. His posture was relaxed but alert. Tall, broad shoulders, immaculate white naval dress uniform. Several rows of service ribbons decorated his chest. Anyone familiar with military decorations could see immediately that this was no ordinary officer. This was someone who had seen real combat. Someone who had survived things most people never would. Commander Ethan Cole. Though Amara didn't know his name yet. She simply noticed him the way people notice unusual stillness in a noisy world. Her eyes lingered for a moment. Then she looked away. But something else caught her attention. 2 men, one sitting near a magazine kiosk, the other leaning casually against a column near the window overlooking the runway. At first glance, they looked completely normal. Jeans, casual jackets, baseball caps, but something about them felt wrong. Amara couldn't explain exactly why. Her eyes drifted back toward them. The man near the kiosk kept glancing toward the naval officer. The other man checked his phone repeatedly, but never actually typed anything. They weren't traveling together, but they were clearly aware of each other. Maintaining distance. Watching the same person. Amara's heartbeat slowed slightly as something deep in her memory surfaced. Her older brother's voice. Calm, patient, teaching her something years ago in their backyard. First rule, Malik had said. Watch the hands. People lie with their faces, hands tell the truth. Amara's eyes flicked down. The man by the window had his hands buried in his jacket pockets. The other man had one hand resting on his bag strap. Too tight. Too deliberate. Malik had taught her other things too. Not because he expected her to use them, but because he believed knowledge kept people safe. Malik Brooks had been a Navy corpsman, a medic embedded with special operations teams. He had spent years working alongside elite military units. And when he came home on leave, he had shared stories. Not the classified details, but the lessons, observation, situational awareness, quiet communication, including one thing he had drilled into her until she could do it without thinking. Field signals, subtle hand gestures used by medics and soldiers to communicate warnings without speaking. She hadn't used them in years. But now, watching those two men watching the naval officer, her instincts told her something wasn't right. Her fingers tightened slightly around the orientation folder. For several seconds, she debated with herself. This wasn't her business. Maybe she was imagining things. Maybe they were just travelers waiting for a flight. Maybe. Then the man near the kiosk subtly touched his ear, like someone speaking quietly into a hidden microphone. That settled it. Amara shifted slightly in her seat. She raised her right hand casually to her cheek like she was resting her head. Then she made a tiny gesture. 2 fingers. A brief angled motion. Held for exactly 2 seconds. Then released. To anyone else watching, it looked like nothing. A random movement. But for someone trained to recognize it, it meant something very specific. You are being watched, possible threat nearby. She didn't look at the naval officer when she did it. She stared down at her phone. For a few seconds, nothing happened. Then, out of the corner of her eye, the officer moved. Not dramatically. Not enough for most people to notice. His shoulders shifted slightly. His stance adjusted. His eyes scanned the terminal in one smooth, controlled sweep. He never looked directly at her, but his gaze passed over the magazine kiosk. Then the window. Then returned forward. A moment later, 2 men in dark suits quietly appeared near the terminal entrance. They moved calmly through the crowd. Within seconds, the 2 suspicious men disappeared, escorted away without anyone making a scene. No shouting. No confrontation. Just gone. The airport continued like nothing had happened. But Amara's heart pounded in her chest. She kept her eyes down, trying to act normal, trying to breathe. 10 minutes later, boarding began. Passengers lined up. Amara joined the line. And as she stepped onto the jetway, she felt it. A gaze. She glanced back over her shoulder. Across the terminal, Commander Ethan Cole was looking directly at her. Not suspicious. Not angry. Just curious. And grateful. He gave a small nod. A silent acknowledgement. Then turned away. Amara boarded the plane. She didn't know it yet. But that small gesture, that simple signal, had just connected her to a secret her brother died protecting. And inside Crestwood Medical Center, a powerful man had just seen the airport footage. Hospital CEO Richard Halden stared at the paused security video on his laptop. His face slowly drained of color. The screen showed a young nurse in a gray cardigan making a tiny hand signal. A signal he recognized instantly. One that should have died 2 years ago with a Navy medic named Malik Brooks. Halden whispered one word under his breath. Impossible. And suddenly, the arrival of a rookie nurse at his hospital had become the most dangerous thing in his world. The city of Crestwood looked calm from the air. As Amara Brooks' plane descended through a blanket of pale morning clouds, the skyline slowly revealed itself beneath the wings. Quiet neighborhoods, wide roads, and a river cutting through the center like a ribbon of steel. From above, everything appeared ordinary. Nothing about the city suggested that hidden beneath its calm surface were stories capable of destroying powerful people. Amara pressed her forehead gently against the window and watched the landscape grow larger. Her stomach fluttered with the same nervous excitement she had felt the entire trip. She told herself again that this was just the beginning of a new chapter. A new job, a new city, a new life. She had no way of knowing that by the time the week ended, her life would be connected to something far larger than a hospital career. Crestwood Medical Center stood on a hill overlooking the downtown district. The building was modern, made of clean glass panels and white stone, designed to look impressive even from a distance. Patients often said the hospital looked more like a university campus than a place where people came when they were sick. The main entrance opened into a large lobby filled with natural light pouring through tall windows. The floor was polished marble, and a long wall displayed engraved bronze plaques listing donors who had contributed millions of dollars to build the hospital's advanced medical wings. To a visitor, the space communicated prestige, success, and trust. Everything about it was designed to make people feel safe. Amara arrived just before sunrise on Monday morning. She wore fresh scrubs and carried the same orientation folder she had held in the airport terminal. The automatic doors opened quietly as she stepped inside, and the scent of disinfectant mixed with freshly brewed coffee drifted through the lobby. A few nurses were finishing the night shift, walking slowly toward the exit while discussing patient charts in low voices. Others were arriving for the morning rotation, moving with the steady rhythm of hospital life beginning another day. Amara paused for a moment in the center of the lobby and looked around. This place represented everything she had worked toward for years. The anxiety that had traveled with her during the flight softened slightly as she reminded herself that she belonged here. Orientation began promptly at 8 o'clock in a conference room on the second floor. 7 new nurses sat around a long table while a senior administrator introduced the hospital's structure, departments, and policies. Most of the information was routine: procedures for patient documentation, emergency response guidelines, and explanations of the hospital's advanced trauma wing. Amara listened carefully, writing notes even when others simply nodded. She had always taken preparation seriously. The administrator eventually introduced the hospital's trauma director, Dr. Vanessa Pierce, who entered the room with the quiet confidence of someone accustomed to command. Pierce was a respected physician known for her precision and discipline. She greeted the new nurses politely, but wasted no time with unnecessary encouragement. She explained that trauma care demanded absolute focus and that mistakes in her department were never tolerated because lives depended on accuracy. The message was clear: if they worked under her supervision, they would be expected to perform at their best. After orientation, the group toured the hospital's different wings. The trauma unit was located in the East Building, connected to the main structure by a glass skybridge that overlooked the city. Inside the trauma bay, the atmosphere felt very different from the quiet conference room where orientation had taken place. Monitors beeped steadily, nurses moved quickly between patient beds, and doctors discussed medical decisions with intense concentration. Even though it was not a crisis moment, the pace of the department revealed that emergencies could happen at any time. Amara watched everything carefully. She noticed how experienced nurses prepared equipment before it was needed, how doctors communicated using brief, precise instructions, and how the entire team seemed to function like a well-rehearsed system. She admired that level of coordination. It reminded her of the stories her brother Malik used to tell about medical teams working with special operations units. Efficiency and trust meant survival. Later that afternoon, another announcement was made during orientation. A Navy commander would visit the hospital in 2 days as part of a potential partnership program between Crestwood Medical Center and the military's Veteran Rehabilitation Network. The partnership would allow wounded service members to receive advanced neurological treatment at the hospital. Many staff members seemed excited by the possibility because the program would bring national attention and additional funding. Amara remained quiet, but the name of the visiting officer caught her attention. Commander Ethan Cole, the same man from the airport. She kept her reaction hidden while the others discussed the announcement. It was not unusual for hospitals to cooperate with military rehabilitation programs, and the administrator described the visit as a simple evaluation tour. Still, the coincidence felt strange. The quiet moment in the airport terminal returned to her mind, along with the nod Cole had given her before she boarded the plane. She wondered if he remembered her at all. While orientation continued, events were unfolding elsewhere in the hospital. On the 4th floor, inside a private executive office overlooking the city skyline, Richard Halden watched the airport security footage again on his computer screen. The video played silently as a small figure in gray scrubs lifted her hand and made a gesture that lasted only 2 seconds. To most viewers, it meant nothing, but Halden knew exactly what it was. He had spent the last 2 years hoping never to see that signal again. His jaw tightened as the clip looped once more. The nurse's name had already been confirmed by the hospital's internal database. Amara Brooks, younger sister of Navy Corpsman Malik Brooks. Halden closed the video and leaned back in his chair. The past had a way of returning at the worst possible time. For 2 years, he had managed to keep certain information contained. Documents had been sealed, reports had been carefully written, and anyone who asked questions had eventually stopped asking them. But the arrival of Malik Brooks, sister inside his hospital, threatened to disturb that delicate balance. Haldon was not a man who panicked easily. His entire career had been built on controlling situations that could damage an institution's reputation. Yet even he understood that some problems could not be solved through careful public relations or administrative decisions. The memory of Malik Brooks' investigation resurfaced with uncomfortable clarity. That medic had been persistent. Too persistent. Haldon whispered the same word he had spoken when he first saw the footage. Impossible. But the evidence sitting on his computer screen said otherwise. Back in the trauma wing, Amara's first shift began sooner than she expected. Late in the afternoon, emergency sirens echoed outside the hospital as ambulances rushed toward the entrance. A multi-vehicle accident had occurred on the interstate, and several injured patients were arriving simultaneously. The trauma team responded instantly. Nurses prepared medical supplies, doctors reviewed incoming reports, and stretchers rolled through the doors one after another. Amara had originally been assigned to observation duty during her first week, but the sudden influx of patients forced the staff to adjust. The charge nurse pointed toward an empty treatment area and instructed Amara to assist with a secondary case. Her training immediately took over. She checked vital signs, documented injuries, and coordinated with the attending physician while remaining calm despite the pressure surrounding her. The organized chaos of the trauma bay felt strangely familiar. For years, she had prepared for exactly this environment. By the time the final patient was stabilized, several senior nurses exchanged approving glances. The new nurse had handled the situation with remarkable composure. From the skybridge above the trauma bay, Commander Ethan Cole observed part of the response. His visit had begun earlier than expected because he wanted to review the hospital before the official tour scheduled for Wednesday. He watched through the glass as doctors and nurses moved efficiently among the injured patients. One figure in particular caught his attention. The same nurse he had seen at the airport was working in the center of the room, giving clear instructions while assisting the medical team. Her calm focus reminded him of someone he had known well. Malik Brooks. The resemblance was not physical. It was something deeper, the ability to remain steady when everyone else felt the weight of the moment. Cole stood quietly for several minutes before turning away. The coincidence that had begun in the airport terminal was becoming harder to ignore. As evening settled over Crestwood, Amara finally finished her shift and sat alone in the staff lounge with a cup of coffee she barely tasted. Her muscles ached from the long day, but the exhaustion felt satisfying. She had proven to herself that she could handle the responsibility of the job she had fought so hard to earn. Just as she began packing her bag to leave, her phone vibrated softly on the table. The message came from an unknown number. Stop asking questions about the past. Amara stared at the screen. She had not asked anyone about the past. Not yet. A slow chill traveled down her spine as she realized that someone in the hospital already knew who she was and who her brother had been. Outside the lounge window, the lights of Crestwood Medical Center glowed against the darkening sky. The building still looked peaceful from a distance, just as it had from the airplane. But inside those walls, hidden connections and dangerous secrets were beginning to move again. And whether she wanted it or not, Amara Brooks had just become part of the story her brother never lived long enough to finish. The days that followed the accident in the trauma bay moved quickly on the surface, yet beneath that routine something subtle had changed for Amara Brooks. Hospitals often operated like small cities, where hundreds of people performed their duties every day without noticing the quiet patterns of observation happening around them. Yet after the strange message appeared on her phone, Amara began noticing details she had ignored before. Conversations paused when she entered certain rooms. Staff members she had never met seemed to recognize her name. Even small administrative tasks, such as retrieving patient records or submitting treatment notes, sometimes took longer than they should have, as though unseen hands were moving paperwork behind the scenes. None of these things alone would have alarmed her, but together they created a quiet pressure that sat constantly at the back of her mind. 2 mornings after the accident response, the hospital prepared for Commander Ethan Cole's official visit. Administrators polished every detail of the building, ensuring that the corridors were spotless and that the newest rehabilitation technology in the neurological wing was ready for demonstration. Crestwood Medical Center prided itself on excellence. and its leadership understood that military partnerships could elevate its reputation even further. When Cole arrived just after 9 o'clock, he was escorted through the main lobby by several senior staff members, including Dr. Vanessa Pierce and CEO Richard Halden. Cameras were not present, but the atmosphere carried the same careful professionalism that large institutions displayed whenever important visitors arrived. Nurses and technicians paused briefly to observe the group as it moved through the hallways. Amara happened to be working in the trauma supply area when the tour reached her section of the hospital. She had her back turned while reviewing equipment inventory when the voices approached the doorway. Halden's calm administrative tone echoed through the room as he explained the hospital's commitment to veteran rehabilitation and the advantages of the partnership program under discussion. Amara did not initially look up, assuming the visitors would simply pass through. But when she finally glanced toward the entrance, she found herself staring directly at Commander Cole. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Recognition passed between them silently. Cole's expression remained composed, yet the subtle shift in his eyes revealed that he had not forgotten the moment in the airport terminal. Dr. Pierce noticed the pause, but continued explaining the equipment around them, unaware that a quiet exchange of understanding had already occurred. The tour continued through the trauma wing, and eventually the administrators moved toward the neurological rehabilitation department located on the next floor. Amara returned to her work, but her thoughts followed the group. Something about Cole's presence felt significant, though she could not yet explain why. She remembered the nod he had given her in the airport and wondered if that silent acknowledgement carried meaning beyond gratitude. That question stayed with her through the rest of the morning. Later that afternoon, as the hospital began settling into its normal rhythm again, Amara left the trauma wing to deliver a patient chart to the administrative office. The corridor outside the neuro recovery department was quiet, lit by soft ceiling lights that reflected off the polished floor. As she turned a corner, she nearly collided with someone standing just outside a consultation room. Commander Cole stepped aside to avoid the impact. For a second, both of them seemed surprised to meet again in such an ordinary hallway. Cole spoke first, lowering his voice slightly so it would not carry down the corridor. He asked her a question that immediately caught her attention. "You trained with Malik Brooks." The words were not framed as a guess. They sounded like a statement of fact. Amara felt her breath pause. Hearing her brother's name spoken by a stranger always carried weight, but the way Cole said it suggested familiarity rather than curiosity. She nodded slowly before answering. "He was my brother." Cole's expression softened for a moment in a way that revealed genuine respect. He explained quietly that he had served alongside Malik during several deployments. For nearly 18 months, Malik had been the medic assigned to Cole's Special Operations Unit. Amara listened without interrupting, absorbing the information carefully. Malik had rarely spoken about his missions, partly because he was not allowed to, and partly because he preferred protecting his family from the realities of war. Hearing that the man standing in front of her had been part of her brother's life created an unexpected sense of connection. Cole then told her something that changed the tone of the conversation completely. He explained that the official report describing Malik's death overseas was incomplete. Certain details had been omitted for security reasons, but he believed the omissions had hidden something more complicated than a standard combat casualty. The admission surprised Amara, though it did not entirely shock her. For 2 years, she had sensed that the explanation given to her family lacked important pieces. The letter they received from the government had been respectful but vague. Malik had been killed during a classified extraction operation, they were told. The exact circumstances could not be shared. Cole's voice remained calm as he continued speaking, but the seriousness behind his words became clearer with each sentence. During Malik's final months overseas, he had begun investigating unusual discrepancies in medical supply shipments arriving at their forward operating base. Equipment appeared that did not match the official manifest. Certain sedative compounds and neurological monitoring devices were delivered under generic supply codes, making them difficult to trace through the military logistics system. Malik, being a medic with a meticulous mind, noticed these irregularities. He began documenting them quietly and sharing his findings with Cole. At first, they assumed the issue was simple mismanagement or accounting errors within the supply chain. But as the investigation continued, the pattern grew more concerning. Some of the equipment being delivered had no legitimate purpose for battlefield medicine. One device in particular, a prototype neurological implant designed to monitor brain activity, had been shipped repeatedly despite lacking official approval for field use. Malik suspected that the devices were part of an experimental trial being conducted without proper oversight. When he traced the shipments back to their manufacturer, he discovered the name Helix Strategic Medical. Amara felt a faint chill as she heard that name. She had seen it printed in the hospital orientation documents only days earlier. Helix was listed as a major private donor funding Crestwood Medical Center's Advanced Neuro Recovery Wing. The coincidence suddenly felt far less innocent. Cole confirmed that Malik had reached the same conclusion shortly before his death. The experimental devices were being tested overseas under the protection of military medical contracts. When soldiers experienced complications, they were quietly transferred to civilian hospitals for long-term monitoring. Crestwood Medical Center was one of the institutions receiving those patients. Malik had been preparing to send his documentation to investigators when the mission that killed him occurred. Neither of them spoke for several seconds after that. The quiet hallway seemed to hold the weight of everything Cole had just revealed. Amara understood now why the message on her phone had appeared. Someone knew she was connected to Malik, and someone was afraid of what she might discover. Before they could continue the conversation, footsteps approached from the far end of the corridor. Cole stepped back slightly, returning to the composed posture of a visiting officer. Dr. Pierce appeared moments later, calling Cole back to the tour group waiting near the elevators. As he left, he gave Amara a brief look that carried a silent message. The discussion was not finished. That evening, long after the hospital had quieted for the night, Amara sat alone in the staff residence building reviewing the orientation materials she had received earlier in the week. The donor list printed in the folder now drew her attention in a way it had not before. Near the bottom of the page, one name appeared again. Helix Strategic Medical. Below the name was a short description explaining that the company had funded several advanced neurological research programs at Crestwood Medical Center. The wording sounded impressive, yet something about it now felt deliberately vague. Malik's investigation had uncovered experimental devices connected to the same company. If Cole's explanation was accurate, then the hospital where she had just begun her career might be directly connected to the very trial program Malik had died trying to expose. The thought made her stomach tighten. Across the city, in a quiet office overlooking the hospital complex, Richard Halden sat at his desk reading a report delivered earlier that evening. The document summarized the progress of Commander Cole's visit and included surveillance notes confirming that Cole had spoken privately with Amara Brooks earlier that day. Halden closed the folder slowly and leaned back in his chair. The situation he feared most was beginning to unfold. Malik Brooks had already been a serious problem 2 years earlier. Now his sister was standing inside the same institution that had been carefully protected from scrutiny. Halden understood how fragile reputations could be when powerful organizations were forced into the light. He reached for his phone and dialed a number he rarely used unless circumstances required it. When the call connected, he spoke only a few words. "The Brooks girl has made contact with Cole." A long pause followed on the other end before a calm voice responded. "Then we will need to manage the situation." Halden lowered the phone slowly after the call ended. The quiet office around him felt colder than usual. For the first time since seeing the airport footage, he realized that controlling this problem might not be as simple as he hoped. Meanwhile, in the dimly lit residence building across the hospital courtyard, Amara Brooks closed her folder and looked out the window toward the glowing lights of Crestwood Medical Center. She had come to the city believing she was starting a new life as a nurse. Instead, she was beginning to see the outlines of a hidden story her brother had died trying to reveal. And the deeper she looked, the clearer one fact became. The truth Malik had discovered was still alive inside the hospital. And someone powerful was determined to keep it buried. The morning after her conversation with Commander Ethan Cole, Amara Brooks woke before sunrise, long before her shift began. Sleep had been shallow and restless, filled with fragments of memories about her brother and the things he used to say when he came home on leave. Malik had always believed that the most dangerous problems were not the ones you could see immediately. The real danger, he used to explain, lived quietly beneath ordinary situations where people assumed everything was normal. Amara had never fully understood what he meant at the time. Now, standing at the window of the staff residence building and watching the hospital across the courtyard slowly come to life. She realized exactly what he had been trying to teach her. Crestwood Medical Center looked as impressive as ever in the early morning light. The glass exterior reflected the pale sky, and the long rows of windows gave no hint of the secrets that might exist inside its walls. Nurses began arriving for the morning shift, walking through the entrance with the calm focus that hospital workers developed over years of experience. Ambulances occasionally pulled into the emergency bay, and orderlies moved equipment carts along the service corridors. Everything appeared routine. Yet Amara could no longer look at the building without thinking about Malik's investigation and the strange message she had received warning her to stop asking questions. Her shift began at 7. When she entered the trauma wing, the familiar rhythm of medical work quickly surrounded her. Charts needed updating, supplies had to be checked, and patients required constant monitoring. For several hours, she focused entirely on her duties, pushing aside the questions forming in her mind. But the conversation with Cole the previous day had changed something fundamental. Now every piece of equipment and every administrative decision carried the possibility of hidden meaning. When she reviewed patient charts, she noticed that several cases from the neuro recovery wing had limited background documentation. The files contained basic medical notes, but lacked detailed records explaining how the patients originally received their neurological implants. It was the kind of omission that might easily be dismissed as incomplete paperwork, yet given what Cole had told her, the pattern seemed deliberate. Around midday, Dr. Vanessa Pierce approached her in the corridor outside the trauma unit. Pierce rarely engaged in casual conversation with new staff, so Amara sensed immediately that something important was about to be said. The doctor's expression remained composed, but her voice lowered slightly when she spoke. "I understand you spoke with Commander Cole yesterday," Pierce said calmly. Amara hesitated only briefly before confirming it. Pierce studied her carefully for a moment, as though evaluating how much she already knew. Then she motioned for Amara to follow her into a small consultation room nearby. Once the door closed, Pierce explained that she had also been reviewing certain records connected to the hospital's neurological research programs. Over the past several months, she had noticed irregularities in patient transfers arriving from overseas military operations. The patients often carried devices manufactured by Helix Strategic Medical, yet the official documentation describing those devices lacked critical safety data. Pierce had raised the issue through internal channels, but received vague responses suggesting the equipment was part of confidential military research. At the time, she accepted the explanation because challenging it further might have jeopardized her position within the hospital. However, the events of the previous week had made her reconsider that decision. Amara listened closely as Pierce continued. The doctor had spent the previous evening examining archived supply contracts connected to the neuro recovery wing. What she found disturbed her. Several shipments of experimental neurological monitoring units had been delivered through private procurement channels that bypassed standard medical approval procedures. Those shipments were authorized not by hospital physicians, but by administrative offices connected directly to CEO Richard Halden. Pierce admitted that such approvals were highly unusual because medical equipment decisions normally required review by clinical leadership. The discovery raised an unsettling possibility. The hospital administration might have knowingly allowed unapproved devices to be used on patients. For the first time since arriving in Crestwood, Amara realized that she was not the only person beginning to question the hospital's operations. Pierce's calm professionalism concealed clear frustration. The doctor had devoted years of her career to building Crestwood's reputation as a leader in trauma care. If the institution had been involved in something unethical, Pierce was determined to uncover the truth regardless of the consequences. Later that afternoon, Amara received a message asking her to report to the neuro recovery wing for additional training. The request appeared routine on the surface, but she sensed that the assignment was connected to the growing tension inside the hospital administration. When she entered the wing, she immediately noticed the contrast between this department and the high-intensity trauma area. The neuro recovery unit was quiet, designed for long-term rehabilitation rather than emergency response. Patients moved slowly through physical therapy exercises, while technicians monitored complex neurological equipment mounted beside their beds. Many of the devices carried the same Helix logo Amara had seen in the orientation folder. One patient in particular drew her attention. His name was Thomas Greer, a former Navy SEAL recovering from a neurological injury sustained during overseas service. According to his chart, Greer had been transferred to Crestwood nearly 8 months earlier for specialized monitoring related to his implanted neural device. The file describing the implant contained only limited technical details, which struck Amara as unusual given the complexity of the equipment. While she reviewed the chart, an alarm suddenly sounded from the monitoring unit connected to Greer's bed. Within seconds, the room filled with medical staff responding to the emergency. Greer's body began convulsing as a seizure overtook him. Training and instinct took over immediately. Amara assisted the medical team in stabilizing the patient, positioning him safely while doctors administered medication to control the episode. The seizure eventually subsided, leaving Greer exhausted but alive. As the team continued monitoring his vitals, Amara glanced at the neurological device mounted beside the bed. The calibration settings displayed on the screen appeared unusual. Even without being a specialist in neurological engineering, she could tell the parameters were outside normal operating ranges. Later that evening, Pierce reviewed the device data with her in a private office. The doctor confirmed that the calibration settings had been manually overridden by someone with executive-level authorization. According to the system logs, that authorization had been entered several days earlier through an administrative access code assigned to CEO Richard Halden's office. The implication was impossible to ignore. Someone in the highest level of hospital leadership had directly altered the functioning of a medical device implanted in a patient's brain. The discovery forced Amara to confront a reality she had hoped might not be true. Her brother's investigation had not been misguided suspicion. It had been the beginning of a larger story involving powerful institutions and dangerous medical experimentation. Malik had been close to exposing it, and that knowledge might have cost him his life. Over the next several days, events moved quickly. Commander Cole remained in Crestwood while quietly contacting military oversight officials who had authority to investigate irregularities in medical contracting. Dr. Pierce continued gathering documentation about Helix devices used within the hospital. Meanwhile, Amara compiled everything she could find related to the neurological equipment, including photographs of device calibration logs and patient records that had not yet been altered or removed. The confrontation came unexpectedly during a formal hospital gathering held 1 week later. Crestwood's leadership had organized an event announcing the military rehabilitation partnership that administrators had been preparing for months. Donors, journalists, and military representatives filled the ballroom of a downtown hotel as the hospital prepared to celebrate what was supposed to be a prestigious new chapter. Richard Halden stood at the podium delivering a confident speech about innovation and dedication to veteran care. Commander Cole was scheduled to speak next. When Cole stepped onto the stage, the room quieted instantly. His voice carried clearly through the hall as he began describing the importance of medical integrity when caring for wounded service members. At first, his remarks sounded like a standard address, praising collaboration between military and civilian healthcare systems. Then his tone shifted. Cole explained that the partnership under discussion could not proceed until serious concerns about experimental medical devices had been addressed. Murmurs spread through the audience as he outlined the evidence collected during the past week. The devices manufactured by Helix Strategic Medical had been used in unauthorized neurological trials involving active-duty personnel overseas. The same devices were now being monitored inside Crestwood Medical Center, without full disclosure of the risks involved. The room fell silent as the implications became clear. Amara stepped forward beside the stage and connected a small drive to the presentation system Pierce had prepared earlier. Documents appeared on the large screen behind Cole: device calibration logs, supply contracts, and excerpts from Malik Brooks' final recorded message explaining the irregularities he had uncovered before his death. The video showed Malik speaking calmly into a camera, describing the experimental program and warning that powerful individuals were attempting to hide the truth. When the video ended, every person in the ballroom understood that the situation had moved far beyond a simple administrative dispute. Richard Halden remained seated at the head table for several seconds before slowly rising to his feet. The confident executive demeanor he had displayed earlier was gone. His voice sounded tired as he addressed the room. Haldon admitted that certain decisions had been made under pressure from financial partners who promised funding and political support for the hospital's expansion. Those decisions, he said, had allowed Helix devices to be used in ways that were never fully reviewed by the hospital's medical leadership. Before he could continue, federal investigators entered the ballroom from the rear doors. They approached the stage calmly and requested Haldon's cooperation as part of an official investigation into the experimental device program. The event that had been intended to celebrate a partnership instead became the beginning of a national inquiry into unethical medical practices. In the weeks that followed, the investigation expanded across multiple agencies. Helix Strategic Medical faced charges related to unauthorized trials and falsified safety documentation. Several executives were called to testify about the development and distribution of the neurological devices. The Military Oversight Office reopened Malik Brooks' case and acknowledged that his investigation had uncovered critical evidence months before his death. For Amara, the outcome carried a mixture of relief and quiet sadness. The truth her brother had tried to reveal was finally being heard, but the victory came without the person who had first discovered it. On a clear autumn morning several months later, a ceremony was held honoring Malik's service and his role in exposing the medical trial program. Commander Cole stood beside Amara during the event, both of them watching as the Navy officially recognized Malik's courage. When the ceremony ended, Amara looked out across the harbor and felt a sense of calm she had not experienced since arriving in Crestwood. The signal she had used in the airport terminal, the simple gesture her brother had taught her years earlier, had set a chain of events in motion that finally brought hidden truths into the open. Malik had trusted her to remember, and in the end, remembering had been enough to finish the story he started.